Hello, welcome to the Big Strategy Podcast. I'm your host and fellow strategist, Jeff Eyet. This is your go-to spot for real talk with the masterminds of business strategy. It's about sharing stories, insights, and those little nuggets of wisdom to help you unlock big growth. Let's turn the key and spring into action.
Amir, it's great to have you on the podcast. Thank you. And this is our summer reads series where we're inviting authors with forthcoming books that are really exciting. I had the chance to interview one of the other authors on your imprint, Rob Dunn, about his book a few weeks back. And we're looking forward to learning about you and your role, not only as the founder of SparkCognition and SkyGrid, also your advisory roles at NATO, but specifically your upcoming book, The Cybernetic Society, How Humans and Machines Will Shape the Future Together. And I want to underline the word together and then hand it over to you for a little bit more of your background and introduction to your inspiration behind the book.
Well, thank you very much. So, as you mentioned, I've been involved with entrepreneurship now for many years. And what struck me is that when I was growing up, the view of technology was a very positive view. It was this shining, glimmering set of possibilities of what technology would bring us. We were promised all sorts of things, the erasure of inequality, or at least the subduing of inequality. We were promised more openness. We were promised better logistics so that we could see more of the world and interact with more human beings. We were promised peace. And yet, none of those promises seem to have come to pass. To the extent that when one looks at even Hollywood, even the movies, even the books that you read now, they have this dystopian tint to them. And there is nothing positive anymore to speak of across this whole genre of creative output from society that talks about technology. Now, why is that? It's a deep question, but more so than why it is, the question is, how can we ensure that these dreams of the future are put to rest as the nightmares that they are? And in our own work, we are able to change the future and reclaim the future once again as a bright place within which humanity will thrive and continue to evolve. Now, evolution is an important element. We're not talking about the good old days. We're talking about days, the likes of which we haven't seen, days that will be so great and so exciting that nothing in the past will compare. Because that, to me, is the human aspiration not of reversion, but the human aspiration of progress. And so the book, essentially what it does is it synthesizes three very important hypotheses, theories, and some would argue even laws across three different areas. So, for example, Peter Turchin has done a lot of work in the rise and fall of societies, the historical dynamics, or what's called cliodynamics. And that is a data-based view of what causes societies to perish and what causes societies to rise. There is another set of laws that are in play in nature, and these curious laws show up in many, many aspects of biology, of how cities grow, of how companies grow, and these are the laws of scale. And Geoffrey West is best known for popularizing these laws. His magnum opus was really a broad introduction for much of the world as to how prevalent these laws are. Then, of course, there are exponentials. People like Moore and Metcalfe have talked about the network effect in technology and have talked about the doubling of technological capacity every 18 months. So one of the things that you realize is that none of these domains of study, none of these domains of thought are independently able to describe the world in which we are living. So much has changed compared to the way history used to be because technology is running now at an exponential speed. That has to somehow be integrated. So this integrative exercise of three core views of the future I've tried to accomplish this for the first time in my book. And when I did that, it's almost like these three pillars come together and there has to be a lens above them so that you can synthesize that view into one coherent thing. And that lens for me became cybernetics, because what was clear was that we were heading into territory where clearly machines are extremely adept now at physical tasks. They're also extremely intelligent. There are many task-based roles that they're already performing that previously only humans could perform. And this trend will continue to get stronger and stronger. Even if you set aside the argument about can machines have a soul and will machines be sentient, set that aside for a moment. The point is that these machines clearly will do more in society and they will contribute more value in society by the same metric that humans are given recognition for the value they bring to society, the doing of work, the doing of labor. So if that is going to be the case, then clearly man and machine are going to coexist in ways that go beyond what we've contemplated. And there has been some early work going back almost now 100 years in this area of cybernetics. But there too, so much has changed that I felt that area needed to be reinvented. It needed to be bolstered by the work across these three diverse areas, and a clear framework for thought about the future needed to be put together, imagining this cybernetic society coming from the trends, emanating from the trends that these areas of thought and these areas of study suggest. So that, in a nutshell, was the small mission that I undertook. And of course, my readers will tell me to what extent I was foolish and to what extent I perhaps achieved a little bit of what I'd set out to do. But I did so in ways that brought the practical in with the theoretical. I am an entrepreneur. I've built companies. Yes, I'm a computer scientist, but and the companies that you named since then, Argon, which is a humanoid robotics company, we're running that, decentralized communications company, Spec5, and I serve on the board of a venture incubator, World Quant Foundry. So we build companies and we build new technologies all the time. So one of the differences, I suppose, is that while some of the book reads as a philosophical musing or analysis, really it's informed by the work that I do every day. And that makes it its way into the pages of the book also. So there's, I would say, equal parts framework and philosophy and equal parts experimental validation of that philosophy by building companies, succeeding and failing.
Well, that's a key component of the Big Strategy podcast, is that in effect, it is meant to be instructive around the frameworks that underlie a strategy. So there's, in my teaching of this and hopefully what our conversations have come across to our listeners, is what you talked about is getting down to these first principles of, like you said, just the arc or the rise and fall of society it's a known process, right? The only difference is time and the amplitude of those waves. Obviously, the biology has taught us much about scaling. We just may not have learned it all, but it's there to teach us plenty. And as you mentioned, the third element is that exponential piece. And what I think is so brave about what you've done is you've distilled the world into what you think. And I'm sure these are not your only three fundamental beliefs, but you felt that these were the three fundamental beliefs that tied together and ultimately scaled into a bigger framework. And I think that is brave. It's one thing to distill it down. It's another thing to build it back up through your own lens, which I appreciate. So I commend you for that. I think that's one thing that certainly stuck out to me as I read parts of your book. I want to just help folks land with this concept of cybernetics. I think we've all sort of turned ourselves over to this concept that privacy is a myth. We freely give away our data without compensation, and we're okay with that as a population. This digital exhaust that we all spew. But I think it's once we get past that digital exhaust, because we don't value it, i.e. give it away for free, I don't think we can think so much about what's done with that data. But clearly, as I interpreted your work, there is a lot that can be done, should be done to achieve these ends that you talk about that, we were promised but not delivered. Is that fair to say?
It is. There is also the sense of personal responsibility. So one of the things that I do try to get across in this book is that, see, 200-300 years ago, muskets came to be, and then they became more efficient to use, and they became lighter, and then they were started. We started producing them in bulk, and farmers got a hold of them, and people outside the military. And eventually, what did we have to do? It became a tool of sorts, but it was a dangerous tool. So what we ended up doing was we taught people that would be around guns how to responsibly handle guns. We built gun safes. We put together, shooting galleries where people could do things, ranges where people could do things in a safe way. Similarly, cars came about, and everybody was paranoid that cars would create a lot of chaos. But then there's driving school, and there's a license, and there's defensive driving, and there's all sorts of ways that we put technologies in cars to make them safer. I don't think that we've done that with digital technology as much. I don't think that we've done that with AI as much, meaning that we are still at a stage where we look at it as this sort of ungoverned Wild West, and we're waiting for someone else to come in and enforce the law, some Wyatt Earp to roll into town and, rope in, the Billy the Kid of AI.
But isn't that the Silicon, being in, the Bay Area, isn't that the Silicon Valley spirit, that if we were to get in the way of digital progress, that we would be hamstringing free enterprise, or we would be endangering our national security because we would fall victim to other nation states without the similar values? What would be your response to that?
Well, my response is simply that I think, first of all, individuals have responsibility. And a lot of the things that we talk about being subject to, the negative elements that we talk about being subject to, today, there are people that have opted to leave social media. So we know that is a possibility. If social media is something that is highly corrupting or very troubling to you, there is an opportunity to leave. Now, some people might say, but that also takes away opportunity. Yes. So a better way might be that you are equipped with the technology, the knowledge of technology, to filter these things at your end. There have been books upon books written about Facebook's algorithms. There's, in fact, a book called The Algorithm. There's, Weapons of Math Destruction. Books upon books upon books that have been written about how algorithms shape our behavior. And I talk about that in this book as well. But I think that the second half of the book talks about things that you can do to use technology to shield yourself. Of course, it requires you to know more about technology. Just like with that gun, you have to invest some time in learning how to clean the gun safely, learning how to shoot in a protected environment, learning how to store the gun. The gun now is a reality. What are you going to do about it? Same thing. And if you don't like the gun analogy, take the car analogy, take whatever modern technology that has pluses and it has minuses. But this is the same way. And I think what is lacking from this discussion is people talk about how technology is dangerous. And then when you say, okay, well, can you write a basic script on your computer to block this, that, and the other? And they're like, well, of course not, right? That's just such a techie, well, but you're using the tool. So what's so beneath you in knowing how to do a little bit of housekeeping to keep yourself safe? I'm just giving you a very basic and simple example. But the reason why I'm giving it to you is because I just don't see how you can have a world with digital systems all around you where you have no way of understanding first principles of any of these digital systems. And you are partaking in the benefits of these systems, but you're also claiming that you are empowered. You are not empowered because you don't understand first principles. So there is a responsibility on us also to understand our technology and actively shape our technology. That seems to have left the discussion, and the only discussion is, should the government do this for us? Are the big companies good or bad in pushing this down, pushing it in our faces, where we as an actor apparently don't exist? We as actors have no choice. We don't have a choice to learn. Why? Why don't you have a choice to learn? We don't have a choice to exercise self-discipline. Why? Why don't you have that choice? So I think there are three actors. There are not just two, the big tech, the government, and the exploited. The exploited individual, the exploited individual is also an intelligent individual, an individual that's been imbued with agency. An individual that with hard work can improve his or her skills. Why has that left the conversation?
It's interesting you say that. I'm trying to align this with the car analogy. It's, again, we're in a capitalist society, so I default to the first principle of the car manufacturer is to make money. And their decisions are going to be completely economically driven. And the seatbelt, as we know, is a reaction, was not a proactive device. So that tells you, I think, all you need to know. And that was, 100 years ago. So because government won't check industry, people can't check industry. So people just feel like they have to cede their agency to the government to act on their behalf, as I'm thinking of it in this very basic triangle that you have. And what I'm hearing you say is that, that's not good enough. That's a bad answer.
Yeah, let me get super practical. Today, we have multiple blockchains which allow us to send money all over the world. And so actually, we don't need a bank to transfer money. We can do that independently. Do we have to take some responsibility for that? Yes, but it is possible to do, and it wasn't possible to do previously. We have distributed solar. I write extensively about distributed solar because as I've traveled the world, particularly in South Asia, I have been absolutely floored by the speed with which distributed solar has become a tangible option for a country of hundreds of millions of people. So when we here, living here in Texas, have a grid failure every single year now. When it gets too cold, we have a grid failure. When it gets too hot, we might have a failure. When there's a storm, we might have a failure, and so on and so forth. I really wonder about microgrids and AI managing those controllers and people having power of their own, distributed power. That is possible. If you have distributed power and the costs of these are declining really, really rapidly, then, you can also purify water. You can also, with more efficient cooling technologies, cool your environment or heat your environment or whatever that might be. So, it goes back to a lot of these questions around the good that was to come from technology. We were told that, yes, technology can heat, but you're too dumb to run anything that can use technology to heat. So let us handle it. Yes, you can use communications, radios work, radios can transmit, but we don't really trust you to use the radio, so we're going to regulate all of this and control this. And you go down that list of basic human rights now, because even communication, there's a lot of groups internationally, and I think some of them have already declared access to the internet to be a basic human right, given how important it is to commerce and to really economic survival. So if you look at all of these things, all of these are enableable through technology. And we're working right now on decentralized manufacturing, small robots that can actually build things for you. And so a lot of what technology can be used for is individual empowerment. And today, where all those technologies are, is maybe where the Unix operating system was in the late 70s, where a small number of people were brave enough to invest in it and develop it. But all these technologies now exist. And so people that take responsibility for these, of bringing them into their lives, can have a subscription-free, completely secure comm system of their own, which I talk about in the book. They can have distributed solar at low cost of their own. They can have water purification, and they can have, in many cases, access to food of their own. They can have compute, which is basically now free, of their own, to the scale that even the President of the United States 3 presidents ago didn't have access to. So the amount that technology can enable is already quite utopian, but the way in which it's deployed, the question is, how do you organize resources? The way that our society has made choices to organize access to resources is what prevents that technology from fulfilling its promise. These are structural problems, and many of these problems are very interrelated. Many of these problems are societal because, as an example, just recently I had a discussion with some friends, and we were looking at a picture of some top engineers at a company, top AI engineers. And it turns out that 75% of them were immigrants, 50% of them were born in China, and yet the company is American. So when you look at that, well, that particular ethnic group, Chinese, roughly 2% or so, I think, in the US, but yet 50% of one of the top groups there. And they studied in China, they came to this country. So then the question is, well, why is it that other societies are being more successful in getting a larger percentage of their people interested in the positive aspects of technology? There was a survey that came out, I think 2 or 3 years ago. The societies in the world that are most positive about technology are in Asia, because those societies are benefiting from a train that goes as fast as an aircraft and connects Beijing and Shanghai. And they're benefiting from road networks that get better every year, and train networks and subways and living conditions, and now even detoxifying the atmosphere with machinery. It's quite crazy what technology can do for you. So they see those benefits.
At the Berkeley Innovation Group, we are a strategy consultancy and AI advisory firm focused on mid-market companies looking to unlock big growth. In contrast to management consultants' typical top-down, hypothesis-driven approach, Big uses a curiosity-inspired, bottom-up approach, leveraging customer insights to drive strategy co-creation. Learn more about our approach by downloading our ebook at biginnovates.com/ebook. Now, back to the show. I'm going to capture what I think I'm hearing you say and correct. These are my words. As the exploited, we've entrusted the government to protect us from profit-seeking class. But in reality, our protectors have been corrupted. And because actually keeps us from accessing what that profit-seeking class has to offer us. Distributed solar, micro. I've just as an background, I used to work in solar energy. In fact, I sold over 250 megawatts worth of solar panels. Wow. And so I know, yes, why would you have a solar power and batteries? You don't need a utility. You don't need a grid. And it's all about scale. It all comes down to economies of scale. And that, as I think of it, is the fundamental difference that we need to uncover, is how do we break these economies of scale even when they are poisoning us, whether it's our utilities system, it's our drinking water, it's big agriculture, it's big pharma, right? Everything is big. And the only way they've been able to get that scale is because they corrupted the government. Otherwise, we, as the exploited, would continue to find ways to regain our agency. And when I seek to regain my agency, I think there's a hell of a lot more opportunity from private sector than there is from a corrupted government.
Yes. Now, let me give you an example, because you've given me the perfect setup to give you a very practical example of why I chose these three theories to explain things. So on the one hand, what you described was beautiful, and I, of course, completely agree with you. But if you think about it, how are these large companies being able to exploit us? Well, one way that they're able to exploit us is because they collect capital, they concentrate capital, and because most things in a capitalist economy work at the laws of scale, it becomes almost impossible for somebody to do an equally good job with less capital and beat the price, because they will always have the better deal. They will always have the lower financing rate. They will always have the priority of the supplier. They will always get their equipment up on time. They'll always have the larger crew. So scale is its own differentiator. And what that has done is that the four large cloud companies in this country, really, they are worth now about $12 trillion. Of course, it oscillates every day, 12, 13, 11 and a half. It's in that range. And 1,000 unicorns, they are worth $3 trillion. So when you think about that, one of the reasons why that's happening is not because these four companies are 4,000 times smarter than the people doing the actual innovation in those smaller unicorns, because these larger companies end up buying those smaller companies anyway. So if the smaller companies were that dumb, why would you buy them, right? So clearly, it's not an intellectual disconnect. What happens is that these smaller companies have no option but to build their infrastructure on the concentrated capital-enabled fabric delivered by the four largest companies. To put it in very simple words, if you're a startup, you're either hosting at AWS, or you're hosting on Azure, or you're hosting on the Google Cloud. And so what that means is that any company created in this country will be writing a big chunk of their revenue out as an annuity, as a royalty, as rent to these large companies, and will never really have a chance to break through and create its own infrastructure. And some of this is the myth around the infrastructure. Some of this is very real. But this is what happens is that, like, now you bring in Peter Turchin. What Peter Turchin says, that what brings about disaffection in societies is not just the oppressed. The fact that you had poor farmers in France wasn't what led to the French Revolution in toto. What led to the French Revolution was the fact that those farmers that were upset were led by richer, more educated people that were outside the mainstream. They were the overproduced elite, where the society was producing smart people, educated people in such large numbers that the tyranny of hierarchy, there's only one king and then six guys underneath him and then six guys underneath that by definition, there were too many intelligent, empowered people in a society, and many of them looked at the guy, let's say, that was number 3 and said, I can be a better number 3 than that guy. I'm smarter. And that was something carried within themselves, which when the right moment arrived, they said, down with the system. And then there was a lot of anger that was mobilized behind them. So Peter Turchin talks about all of this. And what I'm trying to say is, when you create very smart people in society, you create people that can build billion-dollar companies and hundreds of millions of dollars of companies, and they know a lot about technology, and you cap them by saying, you know what, you've got to give me my tax. And no matter what you invent, no matter what you do, I'm going to get a cut out of you. Is that a technologically enabled situation that leads to a spark in a society where a different kind of highly empowered elite has been produced? So these are this is just one point, but there are many, many such points that when you start looking at these three areas from the deep history and you bring that human sociology all the way, you look at how exponentials in technology are creating a super empowered, super rich class. That now, by the way, what is that rich class doing? That rich class is basically telling us what is right and what is wrong. And if somebody says, I disagree with you, they say, well, too bad, we're still going to take our money and fund what you hate and do it in your face. So these are dangerous things, because that money has been collected due to the power of capitalism, and the concentration of that wealth gives them kind of a monopoly. And that monopoly then empowers them to transition into other areas where they are increasingly at risk of lighting societal sparks. Lighting societal sparks in a society that has overproduced empowered elites. So what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, well, I will use that as a segue into my next question. And that is, there used to be this belief that a college education was sort of that dividing line, right, between the haves and have-nots. And firsthand, I see that that's not the case anymore. And I firmly believe that AI is creating another line higher up. And I think we'll see a greater concentration of wealth. And one of the biggest social forces over the next generation is a generation who's gone, $250,000 into debt for a college degree that's absolutely worthless, and they're unemployable. And so that in that case is AI's concentration, not only its concentration of wealth, but also the disillusioned class that it creates. Is that fomenting this downfall that you see, or is it something, or is there another outcome?
Having built several companies, over the last 26, 27 years, I've had thousands of people work in my organizations. And of course, I won't claim that I keep up with all of them, but I keep up with many of them. And this gives me an ability to actually have real conversations as people have moved on. They've gone to other companies. They are different phases in their life. And actually, more often than not, when I speak to people that I care for and I love and are looking to, and I know they're competent people, and they're looking to figure out how they navigate this. A lot of those questions are, what do I tell my kid? My kid's about to graduate. There's a friend of mine whose kid is about to graduate with a psychology degree. Now, at this point, what do you tell somebody that, psychology degree is probably not going to be, you can just look at the stats. It's not even my opinion. You can just look at the labor stats. And these are going to be tough jobs. There's two things there too, by the way. And this part, a lot of people speak of, right? Which is that colleges aren't giving you skills that will allow you to earn the kind of money you need to in an inflated society now, where our parents were able to buy a car and pay for a house in their 20s, and our kids might not be able to, that kind of a thing. But there's another thing as well, which nobody talks about. And that is that in the 50s, the average size of a family home in the United States was 730 square feet. And that 730 square feet wasn't all air conditioned. And there was one small fridge that the whole family shared. And the cars, none of the features that you have in today's cars existed in those cars. So they were cheaper to make, even, ceteris paribus, everything else being the same. They were cheaper to make back then because there's just less in there. They were less fancy. There was less of everything. So my point there is to say that a home is not a home. 730 square feet then for a larger family, and the average now of, I believe, 26 or 2,700 square feet for a smaller family. That is what we call a home. Now, if homes were available at 930 square feet average, and people were willing to live in that home with even more people, because that's what we used to do in the 50s, then maybe it would be affordable, because maybe you can afford a third of a house today. Maybe you can't afford a full house today, but 900 is about a third of your average house now. So now there are other, implications of that, which is that, okay, but everybody wants things to keep getting better. Everybody wants improvement to a point, because what does that mean? That 2 generations down, we'll want a 10,000 square foot house? Obviously, that's not sustainable. It's too big of an environmental footprint. So that's not sustainable. So it has to stop somewhere. So how can these things be managed, and how can some of that responsibility be exposed as personal choice, really? It's personal choice. And, Buckminster Fuller talked about this many years ago, when he said that it is not an issue of technology not having reached a point where it cannot fully take care of all of the needs of the people of the world. That is not our problem. Our problem is that while there are people dying of hunger in Africa, there is grain being dumped in North America in the ocean to control prices. This is just the way the system is. There's no point talking about what is good and what is bad. It's just to highlight the structural dynamics of a complex system, many outcomes of which are truly emergent, to fully grasp what future we are going into. Because so far, all of this emergent complexity that comes out of our system today is mainly driven by human beings. But the big change now that's coming is that machines are firing people at large companies. So machines are creating the impetus for unhappy people in society. Unhappy people in society historically are correlated with instability in society. So an algorithm is directly wired to the part of society which could be unstable. And this has never happened in the past. This is just one small lever. Now imagine at a global scale, millions of such levers that can cause societal change, that can cause instability, that can cause good things and bad things, all happening at such speed and such volume that almost everything that comes out of it appears to be a complex emergent phenomenon that is not independently understandable. Consciousness, you can look at the brain, you can do an fMRI of the brain, you can measure the electrical patterns of the brain, you can do all of these things, but the emergent phenomena that emanates from that brain, that is what is hard to understand. Similarly, in societies where there are billions of nodes, where many of these are now machines connected to key decision points, how does that emergent behavior, that emergent outcome get shaped? And will we just sort of let it be and go in the direction that it's going? And that's the point of the book, which is that, look, there's a theory that says we know from history that an overproduction of elites almost always leads to societal instability and downfall. We have now, with technology, created a way to accelerate that production of elites, while we have the laws of scale, which tell you that as things grow larger, certain things do well, certain things don't do well. And how can you use technology to increase those limits? How can you use technology knowing that certain things are about to scale? How can you increase those limits? There's discussion in the book about the Dunbar number. We are wired to deal with a tribe size of humans. We are inherently wired to deal with the order of 150 people, 5 people in our closest group, all the way to a tribe of 150 people. Beyond that, it all becomes impersonal. So our behaviors start to seem very poor when we go past that 150 because we just don't care about the past the 150 because we can't. But with artificial intelligence and augmentation, could that change? Could fundamentally our ability to deal with large numbers of people change? I draw a parallel between how Jensen Huang is managing NVIDIA. He's managing NVIDIA. He's taken it to one of the greatest companies in the world. But one of the things he talks about often is that he doesn't have hierarchy. Like everybody just reports to me, and he doesn't do one-on-ones. So Jensen Huang might benefit from some special gene that allows him to do that. But if that is what we know works best in companies, then AI that can work with you to enhance your Dunbar number makes you a Jensen Huang-like manager. And once that becomes clear, then everybody will want to do it. And then that means the nature of the organization changes. So what is the Cybernetic Society? The Cybernetic Society is a future society created at the intersection of so much change that no one has been able to really put their arms around the quantum of change and the types of change. And what I'm proposing in this book is a framework that helps us understand many of these forces, not all of these forces, because this is a very complex dynamic system, but many of the major forces, and make sense of what's coming tomorrow and how we can be active players instead of just sitting there watching the world go by.
So without asking you to give away too much, the things that caught my eye or caught my ear, I should say, are these first principles of digital, but then also this concept of the frameworks that not the zero-sum game of trying to reduce the number of elites, as an example, but to raise the limit on the system so that the system can continue to expand under this reality. But the only way that can happen is with technology, as you're saying. So paint us a little bit of the picture. Are there technologies or strategies that we as humans should be adopting now to position ourselves or to create a dynamic where we can excel?
Well, I think there's one thing that I think is very important, which is that the types of hierarchies and the types of, in computer science, we have binary trees where, start with a node and then everything has two branches and then two branches again and two branches again. And then we also have n-ary trees where you can have a root and then you can have n number of children off of that node. That's a kind of hierarchy. And an n-ary tree, given the same number of people, a shallower n-ary tree will fit a larger population as long as n is a large number. It's not 2, it's much larger than 2. So the larger you make every level in the hierarchy, the shallower the hierarchy becomes. And the more equality there is in every level of that hierarchy. So one of the issues is that hierarchies are by definition tyrannical. There is a structural tyranny inherent in a hierarchy. And yet some level of hierarchy is also required. So in the ancient times, kings used to want to cement the fact that they were given the mandate by God. Because the natural question comes, which is that you are one of 6 leaders of tribes. And generally that's how it was, or 6 small principalities. And you became king. So what was special about you? And then, the religious core and all of these people would get together and say, oh, no. This guy has the divine mandate, right? So this is why. So there always has to be a story to protect the people at the top of the hierarchy from immediately being toppled because nobody else in the hierarchy really believes that they ought to be there if they're just an ordinary human. So what do we have to do? This is a lesson of history. This just is. So I think that in different organizational structures within companies, this has implications. For example, if you can do what Jensen does, I think it's a good thing. Not everybody has the bandwidth to do that. But what that does is it actually flattens the hierarchy by a lot, and it creates less of a relative distance between you and anyone else. The issue is never whether you are absolutely poor or absolutely rich. It's always about relative power compared to the power you perceive others in your immediate surroundings have. So I think shallow hierarchies, one, systematically, how can you make them happen? Part of that is organizational restructuring. Part of that is architecting systems that allow us to do that. And part of that is getting the help of digital systems and augmenting ourselves. I mentioned the Dunbar number. One of the reasons we haven't been able to do that is because we just don't have the capacity to deal with very, very broad hierarchies. So how do we cognitively enhance ourselves to be able to do that? And then separately, I think there is also a parallelization of hierarchies. Because one of the things that's becoming very clear to me, at least as I observe modern politics, is that a guy who basically has the education of, let's say, a lawyer is now setting policy on international relations and what fighter aircraft to buy. He has the final say on what particular bomber program or submarine program to prioritize or deprioritize. Now, you could say, well, of course, but he doesn't actually make that decision. But then why is a decision even being brought to him if he doesn't make that decision? And if I'm the CEO of a company, of a tech company, and I don't understand something about what people are bringing to me, I know I'm going to be taken advantage of. If you are building a house and you know nothing about plumbing, and some plumber comes to you and says, oh, this is like the toughest plumbing job ever, he can talk you into all sorts of things. You shouldn't be the guy making that decision. So you shouldn't be at the top of the hierarchy of all things construction. You should talk about what you know about. And that structural bifurcation hasn't happened either. So we've gone on one very narrow path that you can get from this book, which is, wow, the world is headed in this way. These are the 3 core theories that when you look at all of them and you think of humans and machines working together, it's going to create a world where a lot of the things that we've faced in the past might actually be accelerated, and it all kind of makes sense. And that might not be a good future. So then what do we have to do? Should we augment our Dunbar numbers? Should we look at ways in which we can rethink hierarchy? Should we look at ways in which we can decentralize control? And I talk a lot about decentralization. So that's kind of what I would say. Look, this is not a book that pretends to give you full and final formal proof of a better world, mathematically verified proof. This is a book that, first of all, introduces you to theories that very few people have read, or at least read all three of them, that to my knowledge, no one has synthesized. And I believe that that is a very effective telescope, a very effective microscope built of these three theories that allows you to look deep into the future and combine all of that with cybernetics, and then start to ask questions, identify risks from that, such as the one that you raised, which is a very valid risk, and then talk about things that might mitigate that. So just in this discussion, we talked about taking responsibility for technology and stop saying, hey, I'm not a techie. It's like a joke in society, right? Oh, I don't do this. Well, oh, this other guy does that. Why? There was a time when we weren't wearing clothes, and then clothes were a technology and we started wearing clothes. But hopefully you don't call somebody else to make you wear your clothes. So it's about time that you start dealing with technology in the same way. It's your responsibility to wear your clothes. It's your responsibility to understand technology. It'll progressively get easier, but it should no longer just be a joke, because you will be exploited as a joke if you decide that you will expose yourself to technology but will not take the time to understand it. Not a smart thing to do.
Indeed. Well, this has been wonderful, and I've taken away, just as you summarized, we need to understand Dunbar, his theories, and what our biological capacity allows us to effectively manage. We need to rethink the role of hierarchy. I know our earlier conversation to some may have sounded political, but frankly, it was a discussion of hierarchy. The best description I've heard of politicians is they take money from the rich to protect them from the poor, and they take votes from the poor on the promise of protecting them from the rich. And that's their insulation role that they've performed throughout history. And in this case, I think we just need to question hierarchy. If politicians want to put themselves in the middle, that's not my fault.
Yeah.
That they chose to be there. So I need to seek out these direct connections with technology as a way to, as you said, decentralize this globalizing force that you've talked about. And that at the end of the day, and whether you like Trump or not, his platform was sort of had an organic birth because globalization had run its course. And I don't think this is a blip on the radar. I'm not talking about Trump politically. I'm just talking about the questioning of globalization, and the antithesis of globalization is decentralization.
Yes.
And I'm sure there's probably no shock why you're living in Texas, but it is that is what I'm taking away from this and conversation. And I look forward to going deeper into the book, and I know our audience will as well. So thank you so much. If you wouldn't mind just closing out with again, remind us about the book, when it launches, and where else we can keep an eye on you.
Well, thank you very much. This was really a fantastic conversation and amazing questions. The book is available really at all the major online and bricks and mortar stores, so you can certainly get it at Amazon. It's called the Cybernetic Society. It's published by Basic, which is the imprint.
And a wonderful imprint, by the way.
They do some amazing work, and I just absolutely love my editor, TJ Kelleher, who's done amazing books in the past. So you can also get it at Barnes & Noble. You can get it at Walmart. You can get it at Books A Million, really many of these retailers. And then, of course, I'm on Twitter as Amir Husain _TX. I'm also on LinkedIn, where it's more business focused. And then amirhusain.com, AMIRHUSAIN.com, which is sort of a compendium of many of my writings and also some of my research, some of my patents, things that, aren't an essay there on amirhussain.com. So that's how you can interact with me.
Thank you. And we'll include all those in the show notes, and we encourage folks to follow you there and also share their thoughts as they read your book. So Amir, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. All the best.